Okay, Chair, over to you. We're now live on YouTube.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So good morning and welcome to East Devon District Council's Virtual Strategic Planning Committee on the 5th of April 2022. I'm your Chair, Councillor Dan Ledger. Based on the decisions of Council to continue virtual meetings until the 11th of May, I'd like to remind both members and public attending or watching that this Council has delegated much of its decision-making and decision-taking powers to our senior officers. We will continue to adhere as closely as possible to the procedural rules detailed within our Constitution. In the event of a break in the internet connection, please bear with us. We try to reconnect after 15 minutes. If we are unable to reconnect, we'll consider this meeting adjourned and reconvene at a later date. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called by myself. Any members of the public can view the agenda by visiting our website at www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We'll now start the meeting by doing a roll call of all committee members here present, and it's back over to you, please, Wendy.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll start with you, Councillor Ledger.
Present, thank you.
Vice Chair, Councillor Davey.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Arnott.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Bailey.
Present, thanks.
Councillor Blakey.
Present.
Councillor Hayward.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Howe.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Ingham.
Present.
Councillor Lawrence.
Present, thank you, Wendy.
Councillor Moulding.
Present.
Councillor Pratt.
Present, thank you.
Councillor Rylance.
I'm here, thanks.
And Councillor Skinner.
Present, thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. Chair, we are quorate today. Over to you.
Very much for that, Wendy. So we start with the agenda. The first agenda item is public speaking, and Wendy, we have no public speakers today, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Thank you very much. So then we move on to the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 3rd of March. Does anyone have any comments they wish to make? And if so, can you indicate by raising your electronic hands? If not, I'll take that. Councillor Bailey, you should make a comment.
It's not. It's a question. If I may ask it.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. It's about the involvement of the parishes in the call for sites, and Ed Freeman was, and it's reflected in the minutes, was going to give some further consideration for the involvement of the parish councils and town councils. And I wondered, because I think the call for sites has gone out and I'm not aware that the parish and towns have been involved. So I wondered if it might be appropriate for Ed to explain, please, how the towns and parishes are going to be involved. Thank you. Happy
to. Ed, welcome to the meeting. Can I bring you in at that point just to cover that off, please?
Thank you, Chair, and morning, members. I would have to check, but I believe the intention was to email all of the town and parish councils and draw their attention to the call for sites, and invite them to put forward sites with owners' consent for consideration. So after the meeting, I will check that has happened, and if it hasn't, we will make sure that happens as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thanks all. So are there any further comments on the minutes, or are we just happy to take those as approved? Councillor Skinner?
Just a quickie, as the relevance of what has just been said, and the question that Councillor, oh God, I'm terrible, Bailey just raised, was the significance of that is actually really important. It's only just sort of landed with me as you said it. Well done for asking it, Councillor Bailey, because we're out here looking for a call for sites. We put it out obviously to the private sector, but at what point do the villagers, who would know their villages as well as anybody, like to see development take place? So that's really important. And I just wanted to make that point, and well done to Councillor Bailey for asking. It's a really important point. I hadn't realised it before. There we go. Live and learn every day. Thank you.
Very much, Councillor Skinner. Councillor Rylance.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to take issue with something I've literally just spotted in the minutes. On page 5, under option 2, it says that Clistheiden has no community hall. That's actually not true. Clistheiden has a village shop and a community hall, but a village school and a community hall, but no shop.
Okay, I'll get. I think these were taken from requests to the actual individual towns and parishes themselves. So, Ed, I think we can get that cleared up, can't we?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. We can check on that and make sure that's accurate.
Perfect. Thank
There
you.
definitely is a village hall in Clistheiden.
Yeah, thank you. So with no further comments, I'll take those as read and approved. So we move to agenda item 3, which is apologies. Wendy, have we received any apologies? Close to a full house, aren't we?
No, we've got 2 apologies, Councillor Allen and Councillor Chamberlain.
Okay, thank you very much. Agenda item 4 is declarations of interest. Does any member have, we'll do this via a roll call, I believe, again. So over to you, Wendy.
Thank you. So members, if I could just remind you, if you do have any declarations, could you just let me know the agenda item, the type of interest and why you're declaring that interest. Thank you. So Chair, can I start with you?
So agenda item 9, the River Acts requirement. Obviously, I'm a ward member for Seaton, but I don't believe that the River Acts catchment area covers all of Seaton, but obviously we are very much adjoining it. And
thank you. And that's a personal interest.
that is indeed.
Thank you. Councillor Davey?
Yes, Wendy, I think number items 7 and 8. I'm an Exmouth town councillor. Obviously, Exmouth receives a share of the SIL money, and also will obviously be affected by local development schemes. Oh, and item 10, the methodology for defining settlement boundaries as well. That's all personal.
Thank you. Councillor Arnott?
Yes, I'm going to declare personal on 8, 9 and 10 as a Colleton Parish Councillor, and aspects of all those policies affect Colleton Parish Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey?
I'm just going to declare a personal interest as Devon County Councillor for all items. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Blakey?
Yeah, personal interest item number 10 regarding the methodology as a town councillor on Cranbrook Town Council.
Thank you. Councillor Hayward?
Wendy, can you come back to me in a couple of seconds, please?
Yes, of course. Councillor Howe?
Yes, 7, 8 and 10, Bishopscliff Parish Councillor, personal interest.
Thank you. Councillor Ingham?
None, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence?
None that I'm aware of at the moment. Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you. Councillor Moulding?
None.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt? You're on mute at the moment, Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, sorry, none, Wendy, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rylance?
Personal interest, items 7, 8 and 10 on the basis of being a parish councillor and resident of parishes that are going to be affected or generate income. So either generating SIL or spending SIL or being affected by in some way. So we also represent a lot of the parishes that will be covered by a lot of these policies. Thanks, but not 9.
Okay, thank you. Okay, sorry, I'm just noting that down. Councillor Skinner?
Yes, I would declare my usual interest is, and I think probably ought to be 8, not 9, and then 10, and 8 would be my relationship with the Carter family and the Stewart family, because I've declared it all the way long up to now. And I think with 10, I think probably I ought to declare, I'm not sure whether to declare it or not, a DPI on the fact that I have some land in the healer process. I'm not quite sure whether I should leave at that point. I need to give that a bit of thought, really. I wonder if you could let me get to, as we get through, I might try and see if I could Well, no, in fact, actually, if you get to the point you're working out whether or not you should leave or not, I probably should leave anyway. So I ought to define that a little bit better. So I think I'll declare that interest and leave for the methodology of defining the settlement boundaries, although Talenton isn't in it, is it? Oh, it's a difficult one, really. I'll give it some thought, Wendy, if you don't mind.
Okay.
And when we get further through the agenda, if you don't mind, I will consider whether or not if Talenton's not in it. Obviously, you don't need to, but if it does come within it, then I do. If you can understand
Okay.
my quandary, if you understand that, thank you.
Yeah, it's the last item, so just before that we can go back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Wendy. May I declare a personal interest, a disposable personal interest for items 7, 8, 9 and 10 due to my employment as the clerk for All Saints Parish Council, Charlestown Parish Council and Axminster Town Council, particularly in regards to item 9, where all 3 parishes are affected by that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Wendy. So we then move on to matters of urgency. So I can confirm that there are no matters of urgency to be discussed today. Agenda item 6, confidential exempt items. Again, there's no confidential exempt items today to discuss. So we move to the minutes of the Community Infrastructure Levy Working Party from the 2nd of March. And I believe I'm passing over to Ed to just further present the report, or the minutes, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. So, members, you have 2 sets of minutes. The first is from the 2nd of March 2021 meeting of the Community Infrastructure Levy Working Party, where members were asked to consider options for spend of seal receipts in terms of spend on infrastructure within the area. As you can see, two options were presented in relation to that. The first was really about inviting funding bids through a bidding process. The second was to consider priority 1 projects on the IDP and simply to contact infrastructure providers to understand sort of timescales for spend on those projects. It was option 2 that the Working Party recommended, and that then sort of then leads into the following minutes, which were for the 14th of March this year. The second meeting was somewhat delayed because of work priorities changing in the meantime and priority being moved to progressing the local plan. But in the meantime, we had contacted the main infrastructure providers and identified the main projects. And members will see that there were 2 sort of resolutions from the Working Party. One relates to the £400,000 that had previously been set aside to the Dean Way extension in Exmouth. Members may recall that money was set aside as part of a bid that was being made at the time by Devon County Council to what turned into the Levelling Up Fund. However, that bid wasn't successful, so members were asked to consider whether or not that money should continue to be set aside for that project. And members resolved to recommend to Strategic Planning Committee that money no longer be set aside for that purpose and be returned to the central pot. The second issue really relates to spend decisions for the coming financial year, and members were asked to consider a number of projects, many of which don't actually require spend in this financial year, but members were asked to note spend that will be needed in future years, particularly with regard to education facilities to serve a number of developments in the west end of the district, commonly known as sort of Tive Barn Green, Moss Hayne, and the developments on the edge of Exeter, the edge of the Pinhoe area of Exeter, where land has been secured through Section 106 agreements to provide educational places to meet the needs of those developments. And while those developments have not progressed to the point where those schools are yet required on the site, they will do in the coming years, and that will be a significant ask, we suspect, from the Education Authority, but that will of course depend on how those schools are delivered, whether they're delivered as free schools, academies, or through the County Council's Education Authority. In the meantime, the main priority project that was recommended to the panel was the acquisition and delivery of land at Station Road, Broadcliffe, to deliver an area of sangs to form part of the Clist Valley Regional Park and support the habitat mitigation required to mitigate development at Cranbrook. And so members will see that there are two resolutions recommended to the Strategic Planning Committee at the bottom of page 18. One is that £910,000 still monies be committed to support that project, and that no other spend decisions be made at this time, given the need to retain funds to support delivery of a number of Priority 1 projects within the IDP in the coming years, which includes the educational facilities I mentioned to support development at the west end of the district. So those are the main recommendations for Strategic Planning Committee to consider. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. I think Councillor Daly chaired this meeting and it was very well debated, I believe, and I think we came to a cross-party consensus at the end of it that these are the options that we wish to put forward. So I'll open it up to the committee for any questions that they might have. So we'll start outside of committee, there's no one. So we then move into committee. And Councillor Ingham, you wish to speak first.
Thank you, Chair. I just think we can save a lot of time because this is a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. We can hopefully identify an option that will succeed, or we can choose one that's failed previously. I think I strongly propose that we go for option 2. My only concern with the second part of the recommendation, Chair, is it says to consider the priority 2 projects. Just because something's major doesn't make it the most important. You know, it could be minor in scale, but highly important in relevance. So I'm not sure how you feel about recommendation 2, Chair. I'd like to hear your opinion because you've been briefed on this, but I'd certainly like to propose option 2 as adopted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Howe, we come to you next, please.
Thank you. I'm slightly confused by that because I will move, because we haven't had a seconder yet, for option 1 and 2, obviously, or both options, because we have to commit to the SANGs, or whatever we're calling it at present. It is SANGs. Yes, it is SANGs. Otherwise, we could run out of a 5-year housing land supply because we could be slapped with a no build order. And that is just unacceptable for all. We have to deliver SANGs. It is intrinsic to, who is it? Mr. Freeman. It's not Natural England. It is Natural England, isn't it? Yes, it is Natural England these days, that we deliver alongside the building. And at present, we're not delivering it. So we have to. Everyone else has delivered it, including Team Bridge. Exeter's got their eggs in order. And although I, at this meeting, didn't support the location of it, it is the only site that is available, and we have to move on it. So I will put forward options 1 and 2 as per the recommendation from the SIL committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Howe. Can I get a seconder for that, please?
Councillor
Blakey, yeah, Councillor Skinner, just 2 seconds. Councillor Blakey, second it. We'll then come to you now, Councillor Skinner.
Well, the reason I didn't want you to do that was because you didn't ask for a seconder for Ben Ingham when you let Mike Howe speak, and then Mike Howe put forward his recommendation. And actually, Councillor Ingham had already put forward a recommendation of which I was going to second. So had you given it fair play on both, then that would have meant that actually the first one would have gone forward first. Now, I'm not trying to criticise Councillor Ledger. I'm just trying to say that that's how it's gone. So once somebody had put in for a proposal, might have been a good idea to have asked at that point whether Councillor Howe was going to second it or not. And if he was going to say no, then it might have been a good idea then to have said, is there a seconder for Councillor Ingham's proposal? And then we would have known where we were. And I would have then jumped in because I'm actually going to support Councillor Ingham's proposal. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because all the things that Councillor Howe has spoken about is within option 2. So when we look at the wording of what it says, members noted, and it's the third sentence, so it starts on the second sentence down, members noted that infrastructure providers would be contacted to help understand what their priorities were for funding over the next 2 or 3 years, to find out how this sits in terms of match funding for those projects, and provide members with a list of key projects identifying key priorities. The SANGs would come within that boundary, and therefore it fits within that. So from my perspective, option 2 actually is the one that works well, and Councillor Ingham's proposal is the one that I was going to actually now second. But now what you've got to do is you've now got to go through the process of finding whether or not that the first proposal that was seconded first has now got gravity or not. Do you understand where I am, Councillor?
I completely understand where you are, Councillor Skinner, but I didn't believe that Councillor Ingham had actually put forward a full proposal, and that's why Councillor Howe came in. So apologies if you thought.
No, that's not true, Chair. I did put forward a proposal, and I asked you a question which you didn't answer.
So Councillor Ingham, apologies for that. We'll go to Councillor.
Not trying to get you down, Councillor Ledger.
No,
please.
not at all. I just apologize. I've misconstrued the situation, and apologies for that.
Okay.
Mrs. Shaw, can you give us some clarification on how we should proceed?
I have a note of Councillor Ingham's proposal, and it was in relation to option 2 in recommendation 1. However, Councillor Howe moved recommendations 1 and 2. So Councillor Howe has moved recommendation 1, which is on, let me just scroll down, sorry.
Page 14.
Page 14, which is recommended to Strategic Planning Committee that option 2 for the less formal approach of contacting our partners be agreed. And secondly, to consider the priority 2 projects to include a caveat to only look at major providers from Devon County Council, East Devon District Council and the NHS be agreed. I think it's a slight mix-up in terminologies, which has possibly led to Councillor Ledger's misunderstanding of what was being proposed and him being led into seconding. However, we are where we are. We had the proposal for option 2, which Councillor Howe has now superseded with the motion in relation to recommendations 1 and 2. Unless members wish to debate more, we have a mover and a seconder for the recommendations 1 and 2 on the table.
Mrs. Short, just to clarify, and for members as well, we're discussing the minutes of 2021 at the moment, not 2022, and I think that's where the confusion.
Oh, I do apologise.
I've been looking at the minutes of the most recent meeting of 2022, and I think this is where the confusion's lying. So.
Yes, there's 2 sets of minutes.
Yes.
On the electronic.
If with committee's approval, could we just cancel what's on the table at the moment and focus solely on 2021 first? We work through that and then we move on to 2022, and I think that will be clearer for everyone. So is that okay?
Chair?
Yes.
There are no real recommendations. There was a recommendation, it's just for noting, because time has superseded 2021. And that's why we only really got recommendations for committee on 2022.
And I totally agree, but we still need to note the first set of minutes. So if we could have that, and then I ask, and apologies, Councillor, and that's where I think we've had the confusion of option 1, option 2. I think you were looking at the 2021 meeting minutes and I was on the 2022. Okay. So with committee's indulgence, can we please move to note the 2021 minutes and then we'll start discussing 2022. So if committee just quickly just give us a green tick for yes, so that we're happy to note those right across, and then we'll move to the 2022 minutes. Thank you very much. So that's passed. So then we move on to the 2022 minutes, and Councillor Ingham, I'll come to you first if you would put forward a proposal for that.
No, I'll come back later. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Ingham. Councillor Howe, over to you.
In that case, can I move the recommendations as on page 14 for recommendations 1 and 2, which means exactly as has been agreed, etc. All right.
Thank you very much. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Councillor Blakey. is there any further comments you wish to make on the 2022 minutes?
Are you talking?
Yes, Chair. I'd like you to explain your opinion with regards to the reference there, or Ed Freeman, if you prefer, with recommendation 2. And why is it that we can only look at the major providers? Can you explain that?
I think that was felt by the committee that they were the larger asks. If you look at the criteria in the infrastructure delivery plan, if you look at the priority 2, it includes such play provision and the such like, and smaller items that are still a priority for delivering our local plan, but aren't the major key infrastructure deliveries that we would look to SIL to be funding. And that's just what was felt by the committee at the time. Ed, do you have anything to further add to that?
Thank you, Chair. Well, just to say that I think also part of the Working Party's thinking was that there's a £70 million shortfall in funding just for the Priority 1 projects, and those are the projects needed to deliver the strategy in the local plan. So therefore, given that we can't fund all of those, I think the Working Party felt that it would be foolish to start looking at lesser priority projects. But also noting that the neighbourhood proportion of SIL that goes to our town and parish councils enables them to support some of those smaller scale projects, and that's perhaps the route that those projects could tap into to help funding those projects, which are still obviously of great importance to our local communities. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. Councillor David, we come to you next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ed, for just clarifying that one. That was my understanding as well. Can I just point out there are 3 recommendations from the 2022 meeting, one on page 17 and 2 on page 18. So I would like to suggest that we take those on block and that we approve all 3 recommendations.
Councillor, how are you okay with that as proposer?
Yeah, I'm quite happy with that.
Thank you, Councillor Blakey. Councillor Blakey as seconder.
Yep, fine with that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor David. Councillor Reynolds, we come to you now, please.
Thank you. No, so I just had a question about the minutes. So it's a sentence that goes from page 17 into page 18, and it says there's a growing need for school places in the West End of Exeter. I rather hope we're not building school places over in Teignbridge or even funding them. Surely that's a typo. It shouldn't be Exeter. It's the east. If anything, it would be the East End of Exeter or the West End of East Devon. Surely.
Yeah, that is a typo, and we can get that amended at the next.
Thank you. So we're not building a school just so we're sure we're not building a school in Exford or Edford or somewhere. No, not Edford. No, I mean over the other side of the
we're not building a school in Howden Forest. No, I can assure you of that.
Thank you. Well, that would be good actually, Forest School, but that's not what we're doing. But that needs amending.
No, okay, no problem. Councillor Skinner, over to you.
For the sake of speeding things on, I think things have got asked and answered some of the things that I was going to say earlier. So we'll move on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Davey, you wish to come back in?
No, I think I'll just put my hand back down, actually. I don't know why it's gone up again. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so Mrs. Shaw, can you sum up and please take us to a vote?
Yes, Chair. Members, you've had 2 sets of minutes before you. Please, when your name is called, would you indicate whether, sorry, I beg your pardon, let me just go back to what's recommended. That's committee receive, note, and the recommendations contained within the 2 sets of minutes be recommended for approval. When your please press your green tick if you are in support of the recommendation, press your red cross if you're against the recommendation, or raise your electronic hand if you wish to abstain from the vote.
Okay, I'm just waiting for the final votes to come in. So we have 11 votes in support, no votes against, and no abstentions.
Thank you very much. And apologies again for all the confusion in that agenda item. So we then move on to the East Devon Local Development Scheme, and it's over to Mr. Freeman to present his report. Over to you, Ed.
Thank you, Chair. So members will be aware that we have to annually publish a local development scheme which sets out the work programme for planning policy production in the district. So this is the latest iteration of that document and seeks to reflect where we are in terms of plan production. So this reflects the report and discussion that was had at the previous meeting in terms of local plan production, and now seeking to work towards consultation on a draft plan in the autumn of this year. And so the remaining timetable for the East Devon local plan has been updated to reflect that. The other main update is with regard to the Cranbrook development plan. Some members will be aware that we recently consulted on the main modifications for that plan. Those have now been collated and submitted to the inspector, and so we hope to get a decision from the inspector in the coming weeks that will hopefully enable us to adopt the plan before the end of the spring, fingers crossed. So those are the main updates in terms of that, and members are asked to consider the local development scheme and recommend it to council for adoption. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. I see this very much as kind of ratifying the work that we've been doing for the past year or so. I don't see any members with their hands up, so I'm happy to propose it from the chair. Councillor Skinner, you wish to come in?
No, if you're going to propose, I'll second. If not, I'll propose in your second. I think it is all the work we've done. I think it's very well laid out. Everybody's had opportunities to see this. It's been debated on several occasions, and it's a process, and quite happy to propose or support whichever you want to do, Chair. No problem.
Thanks very much, Councillor Skinner. Mrs. Shaw, or Councillor Arnott, you wish to come in?
Just can Mrs. Shaw clarify the rule, Chair? It is that if it's proposed from the chair, you don't require a seconder. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, just to help Councillor Skinner.
Thank you. Mrs. Shaw, can you take us to and a vote, please?
Thank you. Members, it is recommended that you endorse the proposed local development scheme and recommend the local development scheme for adoption at full council. Please press your green tick if you're in support of that motion, press your red cross if you're against that motion, or raise your electronic hand to indicate you are abstaining from the vote.
Okay, that's carried with 12 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions.
Thank you very much. So we are now come to the River Acts and the requirement for mitigation to offset pollution impacts. And it's over to Ed to present another report.
Thank you, Chair. So members will be aware from a report that was brought to members about a year ago now with regard to the River Acts nutrient management plan that had been produced at that time, that there is an issue in terms of levels of phosphorus running off and reaching the River Acts and having a detrimental impact on the biodiversity of the habitat, the River Acts being both a special area of conservation and a special scientific interest in different parts of the Acts, that is. And those issues arise primarily from runoff and sewage reaching the Acts from intensive agricultural activities within the catchment, but also from residential development and overnight accommodation. This report is really to draw members' attention to correspondence we've recently had from Natural England, where they have given us formal advice about how we should now deal with applications that have an impact on the River Acts in terms of phosphorus levels. And it is effectively saying that we should not now be granting consent for developments that cannot be nutrient neutral, in the sense that they should be able to provide mitigation to prevent additional phosphates reaching the River Acts. So this effectively means that we should now go through a full appropriate assessment and the habitat regulations for any developments that are likely to have a significant effect in this regard. And if they cannot provide adequate mitigation to mitigate their impacts, then we should not be granting consent for them. The effect of that is, at the present time, is we do not have a mitigation strategy in place, and so developments for new residential development, overnight accommodation, and some other developments related to intense livestock farming will now have to be refused planning permission until such time as appropriate mitigation measures can be secured either from the developer themselves or through a council-led mitigation strategy. Given the discussions about a year ago, obviously this isn't a complete surprise to us. We were obviously aware of the issue and had been doing work on trying to secure mitigation, and there's reference within this report to some of the work that's been going on with regard to the Triple Axe project, and working alongside Natural England Environment Agency to try and secure mitigation measures, and obviously that work needs to continue and be expanded to consider wider mitigation projects. And the government, as part of this, are offering £100,000 in funding to the catchment area of the River Axe to help provide additional resources to enable that to happen. Members will also be aware that we have appointed a district ecologist who started earlier this year to also help with this and a number of other ecological issues within the district as well. So we're in a much better position than we were a year ago in terms of addressing these issues, and now need to work with our partners to try and deliver a mitigation strategy. I should say that we're not alone by any means in terms of this. I believe the letter that we received a couple of weeks ago also went out to about 40 other local authorities in the country that are affected by these issues, and that's added to a further 30 or so authorities who received letters a couple of years ago on these similar issues. And you can see from a plan on page 35 the areas of the country that are affected by these instructions from Natural England, and you can see that most of Somerset is affected, and members may well be aware from coverage in the local press about the issues on the Somerset levels and some of the mitigations measures that have been taken by the Somerset authorities. Likewise, we will need to work with our partners, as say Natural England Environment Agency, but also Dorset Council, South Somerset Council, and there's a small area of Somerset West and Taunton, which is also within the River Axe catchment, which you can see shown on the map on page 36 within the report as well. So there are various options for mitigation, both on the development site itself, but also measures about reducing farming impacts, which across the catchment account for more than half of the phosphates reaching the river. And also measures in or adjacent to the watercourse, so things like tree planting, introduction of wetlands are likely to be a good natural solution to help to address the issues, and also improvements to sewage treatment facilities can have an effect on this as well. Obviously, to some extent, those help to filter out phosphates, but there's potential for further stripping out of phosphates to take place. And I understand that a recent scrutiny committee, South West Water, mentioned that they are committing millions of pounds of resource to helping to address those issues as well. I also mentioned the Triple Axe project that has been in place for some time, also helping to deliver mitigation as well. So there's a lot of work ongoing, and I hope that it won't be too long before we can bring further reports to members outlining the works that can take place and options for delivering mitigation. In the meantime, the immediate issue is dealing with the immediate implications of the instructions from Natural England. The first is obviously in relation to planning applications that are currently in the system. I think off the top of my head, we had about 30 applications that are currently, sorry, 28, I was looking at the report, applications that are currently in the system that are affected by this. And so we now need to go through a process of assessing those in relation to this issue. And also potentially discussions with applicants about whether there's any mitigation that can be provided. We've also started to put further information on our website to inform people looking to make applications of these issues and the information that they should be submitting to support their applications to help us to consider them as well. The other obviously immediate concern members may have is in relation to housing land supply. We've highlighted in the report that there could be implications from this. Further checking has identified that there are, I think, 54 homes within our next 5 years housing land supply that lie within the River Axe catchment. Obviously, those homes can proceed because they already have consent, but it's a useful indicator of the scale of the number of homes that are affected by this. And obviously that is a relatively small proportion of our housing land supply. If members consider that we're currently required to provide 918 homes per year, that's only 54 in the next 5 years that are within this area. Although it is worth noting that that is largely because we had already taken out the urban extension of Axminster from those land supply calculations on the basis that that site was undeliverable as things stand, partly because of this issue, but also because of the undeliverability of the Axminster Relief Road upon which that development was predicated. So hopefully this report's useful in just helping members to understand the issue that's been raised by Natural England, the implications of that new guidance, both immediate and in the longer term. I see this report as sort of the first of a number of reports that we'll look to bring to members as things progress and work progresses on delivering a mitigation strategy. So the recommendations from this report are that members are asked to note the recent advice from Natural England in respect to the River Axe and nutrient pollution matters that effectively placed an embargo on granting planning permission for new housing in the catchment of the River Axe. And the second recommendation is relates to this funding from government. There's a need for one of the authorities within the River Axe catchment to act as a lead authority to receive the £100,000 of money and coordinate measures to secure nutrient neutrality. Officers are proposing that East Devon District Council put itself forward to act as the lead. Members will note from the report that we have the largest proportion of the Axe catchment area within the district, and also the areas designated as SSI and SAC are within the district as well. So it would seem to make sense for us to take a lead in terms of these issues and to use that money in partnership with Dorset, South Somerset and West Somerset and Taunton councils to help to secure mitigation measures. So those are the two recommendations for members to consider. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. And just as a kind of note of thanks to yourself and the team for getting this to us so quickly, just for members to be aware, from the letter getting to us, I think Ed and the team only had a few days to actually compile a report and get it in front of us. So thank you very much for bringing it to us and the detail that is contained in it. From a personal point of view, I kind of see this as a positive. It's a way of autonomy from where we're looking to put, where we're looking to determine planning applications. What it does do, it allows us to gain the resources and the funding to sort out these issues and to clean up our waterways. I know that we've obviously had extensive talks with South West Water and through scrutiny about a lot of the issues that are being taken up within the place. Hopefully this now allows us the ability to fully tackle the mitigation strategy to really clear up the waters and help the River Axe move forward. So Councillor Skinner, we come to you, please. Oh, sorry, apologies. I need to start outside of committee. So Councillor Young, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. We're clearly in a mess with our rivers. I've been working on various schemes on various rivers in East Devon for a number of years, and every river is almost as polluted as the Axe. The Axe has got really important habitat areas down at Arseton wetlands, and obviously we are very keen to make sure that the estuary is as good as it can be. How much of the pollution is by agriculture and how much is by residential sewage discharge? I believe it's around about 70% is agriculture, all this hiatus about sewage discharge, I think we need to be looking at the agricultural discharge even more so. And I think it's a bit unfair that we have to stop residential development when 70% of the discharge is coming from agriculture. And when you look at the enforcement on agricultural entities, when they do have a bad discharge, it seems to take years, if not centuries, for them to be penalised by the Environment Agency. So I would like to see some improvement there. I do wonder now, is this every application? Surely, if there is an application to mitigate the effects of pollution, I'm sure that that would be approved. And I would certainly support the idea that we take the lead in this, because we have the most to lose on the lack of development in our area, and also the effects of pollution on the river. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Young. You are correct. It is about 70%. I think it'd be just the case of working with the not just the neighbouring partners and authorities, but also the Nutrient Acts Working Party and the members that are involved with that to come forward with mitigation strategy. Ed, I am correct in saying that if any scheme can come forward with mitigations that creates neutrality, they can be approved, can't they? But it's going to be very difficult to achieve that as a caveat.
Yes, Chair, that's correct. The natural England advice is that we should only be granting developments that are nutrient neutral, so where they can provide adequate mitigation to mitigate the impacts of phosphate from that development, then we can grant consent. Our understanding is, however, that it's nigh on impossible to provide adequate mitigation on the sites themselves. So that is going to be quite difficult. So I would have thought that's likely to be exceptional rather than a regular occurrence. But we look to work with our development partners to see where that can be achieved. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. Councillor Jackson, we come to you next, please.
Thank you. Really just a comment, because I think it's quite dangerous to look at the statistics and say, look, 70% is coming from agriculture, and therefore agriculture is the leading cause. We should just carry on with residential development, because it's not a case of looking at the percentages necessarily. It's about how that equates in a land for land use. So it's no wonder that there's that high proportion when the vast majority of the area is still occupied by agriculture. The key there will be, what is the phosphate impact on a square mile of agriculture versus a square mile of residential, and mitigating for that, because otherwise it's not a like for like comparison. So I think we need to be careful there when we're looking at those statistics. That's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Jackson. Yeah, noted. Councillor Skinner, we now come into committee, so it's over to you, please.
Oh, no, I've lost you. No, where have you gone? Oh, can you hear me or no?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Councillor Skinner.
Sorry, I was sorry. Yes. Well, first off, I'm going to move the recommendations that are put forward. I believe this document is mainly for noting more than anything. The question I have, of course, I am a farmer, so I will come from this aspect, and I was picking up on some of the points that Councillor Young was saying, and I'm hoping of his comments of what he said. Some of what he said was not based on too much evidence, but one of the comments he said was, it's not only the Axe, it's also all the rivers that are taking phosphates here. If he was to actually, that was to be implied in such a way that it included the River Exe, and it included other rivers, the River Otter, and it included other rivers around. Actually, what it would do is more or less shut us down from developing anything at all anywhere. So I hope that the comments that he made earlier, he cannot be substantiated, because if they are, then we'll be getting another letter from Natural England saying you've also got all these other rivers in, and that's our shutdown in East Devon then. So I think I'd like to take the debate, rather than scaremongering in that way, I'd like to take the debate in a slightly different way. And that is that I understand from the comments put into point 2 of the recommendation that we're to be the lead council, if I got that right, Mr. Freeman, and that we're going to lead up, and through you, Chair, we're going to lead with this £100,000 of coordinated measures to secure nutrient neutrality. I take it that's to form documentation or to get some evidence behind how it is we're going to deal with this and the like. And how that's going to be dealt with. And if 70% is coming from agriculture, then it's agricultural practices. Don't forget what agriculture is doing. It's actually growing food of which we eat. So what we don't want to be doing is almost that there seemed to be a measure from Councillor Young that was we need to be belting the farmers with a big stick, and we need to be finding them, and we need to be finding them next week, not next century. And that's the words that he used. And I think it's the wrong attitude, and it's the wrong way to go forward in trying to say that there's an issue. I bet if you went to many farmers, they probably even wouldn't know what you were talking about. So we need to look at what farming practices are and how they are implicated and brought into the scheme for this to work. And I'm not sure how a local authority in its own is going to actually deal with that. So I think what I'd like to ask Ed is, and there was a part of this also coming from all sewage works and all the rest of it. I think those sewage works and those things can be dealt with. The private ones would be slightly more different because you've got more people to go to, and that have to be overseen how that works and how you get around that, and knowing where they all are would be one. I suppose that could be found out through South West Water, but it's all going to take time. But the mitigation regarding farming is something that's going to have to be negotiated through how farming practices are and how rules and that are likely to be brought in. I would have thought, if that's where it is coming from. So it's seen to be aimed at cattle farming, whether it be cows or beef cattle or whatever it may be. I'd like to know from, if I through you, Chair, if I could, that how Ed sees that the work that he's going to do in leading up to this, that the work he's going to do collectively across all the other authorities as well, as where that work goes, what you find out, and whom's it going to go to, and how is that going to then be implicated into such a way that's going to reduce the phosphorus levels that we can then look at building houses. How's that going to work, Ed? Could you just run that through me, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. We'll go to Councillor Howe next and then come back to Ed once we've got a few more speakers. So Councillor Howe, we'll come to you now, please.
Thank you very much. What a day. This is one of those things where you really don't want to be in this situation. Councillor Skinner's talked about what Councillor Young said. Actually, I need to back up Councillor Young. The River Clyst, the River Exe, I'm not entirely sure about the others, are growing in phosphates and etc. They're not at the same level at this time as the River Exe, which is why we are in this situation. The River Exe has been high for a long time. But so it's a balancing act. Farmers are the biggest part of this. We are going to have to work with farmers, but at the same time, we're going to have to do something. My question directly goes to Mr. Freeman, though, because obviously this stops affordable housing in particular, which is in dire need in that area. So I'm assuming as part of our local plan, we're going to have to move outside of the catchment, but still in the AONB, and put housing in locations where we're not ideal. Otherwise, we are not providing affordable housing in the areas needed where the people want to live and need to live because of their jobs, employment and everything else. So we don't want to put more housing in the West End when people want to be in this area. So we need to skirt it around and work out that. But more importantly, we need to fix this. And we need to fix it with South West Water and everyone else involved. And I do mean everyone involved. I mean, when you look at the map of other areas, in the similar situation, and you look at Bournemouth, well, Bournemouth isn't going to stop developing. It can't stop developing because basically you wouldn't have a 5-year housing land supply the very next day. It has to build. It has to sort the issue out. And we're in a very similar situation. We have to sort the problem out for the environment, for all the fish and everything else, the countryside, the sake of us all. But at the same time, we have to keep development ticking over so that local people, don't get priced out of the market for a starting point and aren't thrown to the wolves basically because they haven't got a house to live in. So we need to move fast on this and across the party with everyone we can. So I look forward to, another paper coming back from Mr. Freeman in the near future with who we are going to work with, who has the enforcement teeth, but at the same time, picking up on Councillor Skinner's point, we don't want to use those teeth. We want to work collaboratively with, God, I can hardly say that, with all parties and get on a stable point to say, right, this is what we're going to do. But more importantly, we need to build this into our new local plan because it's not a quick fix. And that means housing in other locations that we need to look at so we can accommodate those in need. So I look forward to that work. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. Councillor Moulding, we'll come to you now, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have a number of comments to make and a number of questions for Ed Freeman. And the main town that this is centred on is my town of Axminster. I was born in Axminster, went to school in Axminster, run a business in Axminster, and I've lived in the area pretty well all my life. And this potentially could lead to the stagnation of my town's future. And I am desperately concerned about this. And first of all, my first question is, what powers actually do Natural England have? Do they have consummate powers over this particular decision? That's my first question. If we're going to try to change farming methods, Councillor Skinner related to this, how long will that take? I mean, we're not going to change farmers' way of working overnight to mitigate these measures. I heard from somebody in South Somerset who was faced with this situation that what a farmer has to do is he can farm one field, but 3 or 4 fields of the same size would have to lay fallow. Now, what is that going to do for his business? Looking on to properties and development, I'm obviously concerned. What about extensions, for instance? If somebody wants to build an extension, and that extension means that their family is growing up, there'll be more grey water entering the system, does that mean that you would have to refuse an application for an extension if that property is to grow? Presumably on individual single dwellings, we would not be able to allow permission, and sites of employment use where there are toilets, we would have to refuse planning permission for those. And what about properties with septic tanks? Are the septic tanks working efficiently enough that the water that goes into the land after it leaves the septic tank, is that pure? In theory, it should be, but I don't know that it necessarily is. We have 30 applications in the pipeline. What about outline planning? If a site has outline planning approval, but then has to apply for reserved matters, would that be turned down? So there are lots of issues that I think need to be resolved. But like I say, this is desperately difficult for the future of my town. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Moore. I asked the exact same questions that you asked to Ed just last week in the briefing session, and particularly around permitted development as well, where we stand with the likes of that. And at the time, Ed was looking at getting more guidance from Natural England. So I think that's an opportune time to bring you in just to cover off Councillor Skinner, Councillor Howe and Councillor Moulding's questions, please, if you could.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So yes, if I go back to Councillor Skinner's comments and work forward from there, I mean, it is worth saying that there's been lots of work over the years in terms of mitigating the impacts of farming activities already. Members may be aware, there's been grant funding available for, covering over cattle yards, creation of new silage storage facilities and things over the years. All of that was linked to this in terms of trying to reduce phosphate runoff from those uses. So there's been lots of work going on over the years. and that continues, and you'll see within the report there's a link to the Triple Axe project and work program there, much of which is related to low phosphate farming activities, potentially taking farmland out of intensive livestock farming activities and things like that. So that's been going on for many years and will continue. Those are sort of short-term mitigation projects in many cases, and this is the big challenge I think that faces us is in order to grant consent for residential development, which is obviously going to be new homes that we hope will be in place and be occupied for probably hundreds of years. We need to provide mitigation that's there in perpetuity rather than short-term projects, which is much of what the mitigation has been focused on up till now. I think in terms of that, that's likely to take the form of things like planting of forests, wetland areas, reed bed systems, those sorts of natural solutions that help to reduce phosphate levels in terms of what's reaching the river. And so those sorts of projects I think are most likely to be the sort of form of mitigation that we should be looking to provide. And it may be the case of the council taking on responsibility to deliver something like that, and then introducing a charging system similar to perhaps what we've done in the River Exe and the pebble-bed heaths in terms of recreational activities on those habitats, of developing a mitigation strategy that we then help to deliver from contributions from developers. And have governance arrangements sat above that. So there are models like that around there and across the country, and obviously we have experience of that in terms of the Exe and the pebble-bed heaths to bring to bear on this as well. So I suspect the solution is going to be something along those lines, but there's obviously a lot of work needed in terms of how we deliver that. As I say, we do have the benefit of learning experience from what's happened elsewhere. There are a number of rivers where Natural England issued these kind of letters a couple of years ago, including the Somerset levels. So I hope in working with South Somerset and Somerset Western Taunton, who obviously have parts of the catchment of the Axe within their areas, we can also learn from their experience with the Somerset levels. So I hope they bring quite a lot of knowledge and experience to the table, which will help us as well. And it's worth saying in terms of other rivers that some areas of the country are in a position where this sort of moratorium on development does apply across their entire district. I've been attending a series of workshop sessions hosted by the Planning Advisory Service over the last couple of weeks with those other authorities affected by this, and some of them are in dire situations whereby they effectively have a moratorium on development across their entire district. And in one case, they were on the verge of adopting a new local plan just as they received this letter from Natural England as well. So while I agree we need to take action and need to address these important issues, it could be a lot worse. Turning to, the other thing to say about other watercourses within the districts is I have had conversations with our ecologist Rory about looking at the situation in other watercourses so that we understand what the situation is a bit better in terms of phosphate levels in other watercourses in the district, and understand what the likelihood of this happening in terms of other watercourses, and also starting to think about, obviously mitigation in the Axe needs to be the top priority, but how we can then use that learning to help to mitigate impacts on other watercourses in the district. So hopefully this is taking us in a direction where we can improve water quality across the district in other rivers and not just the Axe. In terms of implications for the local plan, moving into the concerns raised by Councillor Howe, I think clearly this is an issue for the local plan, and we need to understand this issue better and understand how we're going to deliver mitigation. But obviously the local plan is likely to be for a period of 15 to 20 years. And general estimates suggest that we should be able to get a mitigation strategy in place within a couple of years. So I see that more as in terms of the local plan, not about necessarily where we're planning growth, but in terms of thinking about timescales as to when that can come forward to ensure that growth within the catchment area of the River Axe is not coming forward in advance of mitigation measures being in place to ensure that those developments are nutrient neutral. But I don't think it would prevent us from planning for growth in that area during the planned period, because the planned period is for such a long period of time. As long as we allow ourselves to get the mitigation in place first, then we can still plan for suitable growth in that area. The 5-year land supply situation I mentioned in the presentation, so that there are implications for that. I don't think they're severe, but as I said when I presented the housing monitoring report a couple of meetings ago, we are in a position where I think at 5.49 years, and it's a declining position. So obviously this doesn't help us in terms of maintaining that position. I should say at one of the workshop sessions I attended, there was a representative from the Department of Levelling Up in attendance who did say that they were looking at how they would apply the 5-year land supply requirements and the housing delivery test within authorities that are affected by these instructions from Natural England. So they are aware of that, are looking at it in terms of whether or not it's reasonable to expect those authorities to still comply with that, or what they may be required to comply with. So we wait to hear from them in terms of how that's going to be dealt with. They did highlight that they did make allowances within the housing delivery test for the impacts of COVID-19 in 2020. So there is precedent for that. So I will keep members informed as to what, if any, we hear with regard to that. Turning to Councillor Moulding's points, I think Councillor Moulding asked what powers do Natural England have? Well, they're the statutory consultative for nature conservation issues. They can't formally instruct us. Ultimately, as East Devon District Council, we are the classed in the legislation as the competent authority. So it's up to us as the local planning authority to make our own decisions. But under the legislation, we obviously have to have a strong regard to these issues and the advice of Natural England in our decision making. And obviously, if we go against their advice, we have to be prepared that we may be legally challenged either by Natural England or by other nature conservation bodies. So I don't think that's a route we want to go down. And obviously, we want to ensure that we're not having a detrimental impact in terms of phosphates on the river. So I think we have to strongly follow the advice that we've been given. How do we change farming methods? Well, I think, as I say, a lot of work's been done through the XXX project to try and look at that. One of the mitigation measures may be to take land out of intensive livestock production. I say lots of further work needs to be done in terms of the mitigation, and that will obviously be the subject of further reports in the future. And finally, in terms of sort of the scope of the applications affected by this, I think this is one of the big questions that we're trying to resolve, and the hope is that through these workshop sessions I referred to that the Planning Advisory Service are running, we'll end up with a fairly definitive list. But I would say that my understanding at the present time is that house extensions are not affected by this. That is on the basis that the likely impact of a house extension is likely to be so insignificant that we can screen those out under the habitat regulations as not having a significant effect. Private drainage systems is a more complex one that will obviously depend on how the drainage system works and where phosphates are discharged to from that system. So we'll have to look at that more on a case-by-case basis, I suspect. In terms of outline planning applications and reserved matters, that yes, there is a danger that applications that currently have outline planning permission then have to be reassessed under the habitat regulations at the reserved matters stage. So there is case law for that being the case. And so there is a danger that applications that have got outline planning permission would be captured by this at reserved matters stage. Still in the process of understanding how that might work and how many applications and developments might be affected by that. Equally, as the chair mentioned, applications for prior approval for works that are permitted development can also be potentially captured by this as well. So it has quite far-reaching impacts for essentially any developments that potentially have an impact in terms of phosphate levels through introducing additional overnight accommodation or additional phosphate loads into the ACS. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. I've got 4 more speakers. I think we'll take those 4 and then we'll go to a vote. Councillor Skinner did propose this earlier, and I didn't ask for a seconder. So could I ask for a seconder for his proposal?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lawrence. So we move to Councillor Hayward next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief. In Axminster, we have got a few lovely civic buildings, and on one of them is a mural. And Councillor Moulding will know his great-grandfather is depicted on this mural as someone who went up and down the Axe, plucking trout and salmon out. It's a lovely piece of artwork. It's a lovely story. And Councillor Moulding is quite right that this will have a profound effect, primarily on Axminster, but also the entire Axe catchment area. But ultimately, what we're faced with is killing a river. And this is a wake-up call. It's a red card we've been given. We've probably had yellow cards before. But this is a red card. And I don't think we can ignore Natural England, because I'm sure there certainly would be legal challenges if we ask for their advice and then blatantly ignore it. And as the Chair has said, it's an opportunity to do things differently. I'm delighted to work with other groups, ostensibly in charge stock, who do river monitoring. And they have had grave concerns for a long time about the River Kit flowing into the Axe, and the effect of intensive agriculture and building development is having on those rivers. And we can't keep, doing this and saying, well, we'll do it, we'll mitigate a little bit, we won't make it worse, we'll just leave it terrible as it is. There's been recent incidents in the Collie Valley, and I'm sure Councillor Arnott has got his hand out. He'll probably speak on that. But this is a wake-up call. It's an opportunity for us to do the right thing for the environment. And yes, you can't expect the farming community to change overnight, but we're not expecting them to. We're asking them to work with us, work with other districts and other planning authorities to come up with a solution to stop us destroying watercourses. And ultimately, if we don't, the rivers will die and there won't be any trout and salmon, and Councillor Moulding, in reality, I'm going to have to name you again, Councillor Moulding's here because one of his ancestors was able to pluck fish out of the river to feed his family. So we're grateful for that. And, but had that not been the case, the world would be a different place. So we must take this seriously. We must do everything we can, work with. I'm absolutely delighted that we should be the lead authority, because ostensibly the River Axe is in East Devon. A lot of development going on in South Somerset, north of here in Chard, is pumping huge amounts of phosphates and nitrates. And arguably they can say, well, it's not really our problem because it flows downriver, you deal with it. But it's having an impact on us. So we need to work with them, come up with tangible, workable solutions, plan for the future. And I have no doubt that we can work around this, but this is a golden opportunity for us now to do the right thing and say to developers, and I suppose my big worry is that if developers are forced, obliged to come up with these mitigating measures, their first response will be, well, you can kiss goodbye to affordable housing, you can kiss goodbye to schools, you can kiss goodbye to everything else because we've got to do this. No, unfortunately, you've got a moral obligation not to ravage and rape East Devon and kill our rivers, kill our fields, kill our environment. So it is significant, and I'm delighted that this has come before you. And again, thank you, Chair, echoing your point. Thank you to Ed and his team for getting this report in front of us. And I look forward to reading more and learning more and helping solve this problem. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hayward. I think there's been quite a few people that have mentioned South Somerset. Just to draw members' attention to it, their full council did pass a motion at their last council meeting in February regarding phosphate levels across the Somerset levels, but then also going down into the River Axe. So it's something for everyone to look at. Councillor Lawrence, we'll come to you now, please.
Thank you, Chair. I took note of what Councillor Young said about the agriculture contributing to phosphate levels, but I was also something that Councillor Jackson pointed out, that 70% of phosphates coming from farming is not surprising in the Axe Valley because of the amount of land that's being used for farming. And I do happen to know that farmers are now being urged to use lower phosphate fertilizers. One of the problems with that is obviously that the yields aren't quite so good, but they don't have the same effect on our waterways. I just wanted to make one more point as well. I was making notes as it was going along. There doesn't seem to be an easy mitigation system, particularly where houses are concerned. I know Ed did mention that we could sort of look at putting in reed beds and forests and various other things. What I'm concerned about is, because the situation is like it is at the moment, before we look at other development, before we want to charge other developers, how do we sort it out at the moment? And does the cost fall squarely in the lap of East Devon District Council to pay for any mitigation measures as we stand? Or do we just sort of do something going forward and forget about what's going on at the moment? I'd like to ask Ed through you, if I could.
No problem.
Thank you.
No problem, Richard. We'll come back to Ed in a second. Just for a quick answer, it's probably going to be done through a recharge. So it'll be a roof tax basically across properties that are developed. But Councillor Arnott, we'll come to you now, please.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to agree with your opening statement some minutes ago, that we need to look at the positives in this. This is, in effect, as Ed indicated as well, we're well tooled up for this. We've got the new ecology officer, which this administration was very keen to have appointed as soon as possible and now has. And I think we are in a very good position to say, well, look, we'll lead on this amongst all the other authorities. So I'm going to come out on an equally positive note, Chair, but not before I take us into incredibly negative territory. And I'm very sorry about this, because this has to be political. This sits within a number of contexts. First of all, it's, what was it, 2016? 6 years ago, isn't it? We left Europe. So what environmental improvements have been the fruit of that departure? Well, in this respect, absolutely nothing. In my own ward, as has been alluded to earlier, about 2 years ago, 100,000 litres of raw slurry was discharged into a brook that went into the Collie, that went into the Axe, that went into the Axe estuary. And this was a disgrace. There were live planning issues around this as well. So I checked yesterday just to find out how the promised prosecution was going from the Environment Agency. And, you know, members may not be surprised to find that nothing has happened. So I asked, well, why has nothing happened in that case? Not wishing to prejudice any future proceedings, but it looks about as clear a slam dunk as I've ever come across in my entire life. And the reason is lack of resources. This government has, over many years, defunded the Environment Agency. We are not inspecting, we are not enforcing, we are not prosecuting. So I have to add another little asterisk here, if I may. Members may recall I often say some of my best friends are Conservatives. This is true. I would also say some of my best friends are farmers, and that is true. Our MP, where we live, is Neil Parish. He is not one of my best friends, I suppose. I should be honest about that, but I've got nothing against the chap. But he is a farmer, and he is chair of the relevant parliamentary committee. And he does a good deal of special pleading on behalf of the dairy industry. And good for him, because we want the dairy industry to thrive. But what we need him to do, and what we need Mr. Jupp to do, is to step up, get on to Mr. Sunak and say, for God's sake, fund the Environment Agency so we can stop this stuff happening. And when it does happen, we can prosecute. And Councillor Skinner will know there was an anaerobic digester leak from Greendale, from his chums, the Carters. And, usual thing, slap rest. I was probably about a day's turnover to pay the eventual fine. This is going on everywhere, and it is giving farming a bad name, which is entirely undeserved. People are just, I think, improvising on the basis that they know there are unlikely to be either A, no consequences, or B, consequences of any significance to their business. So we are in a position now where we have to move ahead with these recommendations, which I've seen have been seconded, and I would have happily seconded them in any case. But we have to take it up a level. So, Chair, just to let you know, as leader of the council, I will be writing to Neil Parish and Simon Jupp after this meeting, and I will ask them to make immediate interventions with the Chancellor and with the Environment Agency to make sure they have sufficient funding to enforce, because otherwise the people of the Axe Valley will not have the housing they need. And I suppose I should declare a personal interest here. I'm a director of a community housing trust in Colleton. Well, good luck us. You know, we're finding sites, we won't be able to build them. So obviously there is a spread of peril here. The certain aspect of the farming community is responsible for it, but obviously, and we know, and there have been meetings with Southwest Water about the control of sewage, and that's another subject. But if I'm frank with you, Chair, I think the sewage debate with Southwest Water is at a much more advanced stage than the debate with the Environment Agency and dealing with the farming issues. So thank you for letting me speak, Chair.
Councillor Arnott. I obviously can't tell you how to write letters, but could I suggest that we invite all three? We write it to all three MPs on Stride, because the Exe Valley is a key area of interest, I know, for farming practices, and we are getting a lot of correspondence from our colleagues over at Mid-Devon. Councillor Davey, we move to you now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I'm going to try and end on a positive note. As Councillor Hayward says, this is a wake-up call, but we can also look on it as an opportunity. We should be developing low-impact housing and low-impact farming methods. That's what we should be doing anyway. And it's the reason we've got the red card is because we haven't been doing that. We've just ignored the problem and hoped it would go away. And we may well be in danger of doing the same with some of the other rivers in the area. So it's absolutely essential that we get on with this work. If we don't take these measures, then other rivers could well follow. So I think, you know, we need to work on how do we get phosphate neutral developments? How can we reduce the amount of runoff from farming? Because the kind of issues that Councillor Arnott referred to, where large amounts of slurry are released into a river, are appalling and have an immediate impact. But it's the kind of day-to-day leaching and runoff that is really giving rise to these ongoing problems. If it was just a few problems, then it could be easily stopped. But it's the ongoing leaching of phosphates into the river that is the real problem. And as Councillor Hayward so eloquently said, we've got to stop doing that. We can't just pollute our own rivers so that nothing can survive in them. We've got a responsibility to do that. But there is an opportunity here to develop the kind of farming and the kind of housing that actually is what all farming and all housing should be like.
Thanks very much, Councillor Davey. Ed, can I just quickly come to you before we go to Mrs. Shaw to sum up, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So yeah, I think Councillor Lawrence was raising a couple of questions about the extent of our responsibilities and where the cost burden sits in terms of mitigation. So just to come back on those points, really was just to say that really our responsibilities relate to our decision making as a local authority, particularly as a local planning authority, and ensuring that we're not undertaking development or granting consents to plans or projects, I think is how the legislation puts it, that have a detrimental impact on the River Axe in terms of phosphate levels. So that's ensuring that we mitigate the impacts of any developments that we grant, or that we put measures in place through plans like the local plan to ensure that they are appropriately mitigated. The cost of that should rest with the developers to mitigate the impacts of their own developments. So ultimately, the delivery of the mitigation should be cost neutral, ultimately, in terms of the council, in much the way that the mitigation that's being provided for habitat impacts at the River Axe and the Pubbed Heaths are in terms of the impacts, the developer contributions essentially paying for the mitigation strategy. So we would hope that the same would apply here. In terms of actually improving the water quality, bearing in mind that our work is going to be mainly about mitigating the impacts of development so it doesn't get any worse. In terms of improving it, I think the responsibilities for that primarily rest with Natural England, the Environment Agency and South West Water. And I know there's a lot of work going on there and millions of pounds of money being invested in terms of that. So they're really where the big gains will be made. Our responsibilities are primarily mitigating the impacts of the projects that we will be granting consent for through the planning regime. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Ed. Really appreciate it. Mrs. Shaw, can we come to you now, please?
Yes, Chair. You have recommendation that the committee note the very recent advice from Natural England in respect of the River Acts and nutrient pollution matters that may place an embargo on granting planning permission for new housing in the catchment area of the River Acts. And secondly, that committee delegate authority to the Service Lead Planning Strategy and Development Management to liaise with Dorset Council, South Somerset District Council and West Somerset and Taunton Council, with a view to this authority becoming the lead authority to receive £100,000 to coordinate measures to secure nutrient neutrality. Members, please press your green tick if you're in support of that recommendation, press your red cross if you're against the recommendation, and raise your electronic hand if you're abstaining from the vote.
Okay, I have 12 votes in support, no votes against and no abstentions.
Thank you very much for that. So we move to the last agenda item of the day, which is methodology for defining settlement boundaries. And again, Ed, it's over to you to present your report. Actually, sorry, Ed, can I just, Councillor Skinner, you did ask at the start to have a think on your interest. So can I just clarify?
Thank you, Chair. I've done my little bit of thinking and I've done my bit of reading, and actually Tallaghton isn't within this report at all. It's not even in it. It's not in the tier 4. So on that basis, the methodology doesn't actually work for that. So I feel quite comfortable in carrying on, sir.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. Ed, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So this report follows on from discussions members have had recently about the working draft local plan and the definition of settlement boundaries to those settlements within the settlement hierarchy that's been discussed. So members will recall there was discussion about how tightly those boundaries should be drawn and whether or not there should be scope for development to come forward adjacent to but outside of those settlement boundaries. Members preferred what was labelled as option C, which was not to have a policy enabling development on the outside edge of settlement boundaries, but to draw settlement boundaries more loosely to help provide a supply of smaller sites, but within the settlement boundaries that would enable some small scale growth to take place within settlements. So this report proposes a methodology to define those boundaries based on that premise, I suppose. What's set out in this report is a sort of criteria-based approach to drawing boundaries. Some members may recall we set out a criterion methodology when last drawing settlement boundaries through the villages plan. So we think that's a useful approach in terms of ensuring members understand and are accepting of the principles and the methodology we're going to use before we go through the work of actually drawing all of the boundaries and bringing those back to members in due course. So this criteria has been worked up in line with members' steer in terms of the working draft local plan, and you'll see there's various criteria in here that seek to open up some opportunities for perhaps for small scale development within village boundaries by incorporating land that we might previously have excluded, where that's large gardens or paddock areas or other small parcels of land smaller than perhaps 0.15 of a hectare that could accommodate about 4 or 5 homes, enabling some small scale growth. So you'll see criterias, I think it's down at the bottom of page 44, perhaps criteria B4, B5 and B6 in particular talk about smaller parcels of land that we might have previously have excluded in terms of drawing boundaries quite tightly as we've done in the past, but would now be incorporated within built up area boundaries to enable some minor opportunities for small scale growth to take place. So hopefully this methodology is in line with members' wishes, but happy to take any questions on the criteria or comments, and hopefully we can make any refinements needed so that we can move forward with this work and help to start to define some of these boundaries. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Ed. So we'll start outside of committee. Does anyone wish to speak from outside of committee? No. So then we move inside, and Councillor Rylance, we come to you first, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I did have a very specific, well, fairly specific question about B4, which is sites to be included, about areas of land that are largely contained between site allocations proposed in the draft local plan and the main built-up area of related settlement. So my question about this is, how does this interact with the our outgoing policies on coalescence of settlements? And would it, for example, allow the area between an existing village and a strategic allocation to be infilled with a largish amount of houses? Because that is a specific concern. And I'm sorry for being slightly parochial, but we do end up with most of the building over at my end of the district. But you know, how does that interact with coalescence of settlements? And is it specific design? You know, do we still have a policy specifically designed to stop coalescence of settlements?
Thanks very much, Councillor Rylance. We'll come to Ed in a second, but I think it interacts quite nicely with what the work that we're going to be doing on green wedges, as well as the coalescence of settlements, and we need some robust policies on that. Councillor Bailey, we come to you now, please.
Thank you very much. So I think that my understanding, and Ed can correct me if I'm wrong, is that these criteria are largely taken from the Villages Plan from 2017. Is that right, Ed?
Well, it's for you, Chair, that they're a progression of that. We haven't started with a blank sheet of paper, but we have adapted them to reflect current wishes of members. Yeah.
Yes. Because I don't like B4, B5 and possibly B6. And I think that what this is doing is allowing, kind of by stealth in a way, more encroachment, probably from our villages into the open countryside. And I think that it's particularly B4, but also B5, you know, they weren't part of the Villages Plan. And I feel that that we're doing so much work around how we can get a few extra houses at the perimeters of which will be in the open countryside, and yet we still haven't done any work around redevelopment, as far as I'm aware, of our brownfield sites. So I just feel that our focus, our energy, our time, our money is being spent not in the right direction. And because our council plan specifically says Green East Devon means placing the highest emphasis on the natural capital of our stunning environment, coast and countryside, and the value and importance of biodiversity within it. As custodians for future generations, preserving and enhancing our natural environment is key. And yet what we're doing today, and Ed spoke about it, is talking about building in large gardens and paddock areas. So, and yet we still haven't done any strategic work about developing or redeveloping in our towns. I still haven't heard anything about the strategic brownfield site assessment. The urban capacity study was about within towns on areas that haven't been built upon. So I think my general proposal would be that this is fine up to a point, but yet again, we're focusing on greenfield development. But I don't agree with B4 and B5, and I would like to propose that they're removed from this, because I think that that's undermining the boundaries of our settlements, and actually could, you know, some of our settlements like West Hill and many other settlements are already being allocated loads of houses, and this is going to potentially allow them to allocate even more. And we still haven't focused in the correct direction, which is focusing on our brownfield sites that can potentially be redeveloped. And I know that we've referred to brownfields in our call for site, but that on its own is not enough. And I think we need to do more. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Bailey. So that's a proposal there. Does that carry a second off anyone? No, it doesn't look like it. So
Not yet.
How do you mean? There's
Move
lots
the
of people
council-
with their hands up.
Pardon?
There's lots of people with their hands up.
Yeah, but a proposal's been made, Councillor Ingham, so I've got to ask for a seconder. It's the way the procedure works. Councillor Howe, we move to you, please.
I'm actually very close to seconding Councillor Bailey's proposal, but I need to come from a slightly different way, but in the same vein. We as a committee, meeting or two ago, I can't remember when it was, decided that no tier 4, I believe it was, settlement should be subjected to no more than 10% growth. That is not included in this at all. And if you put that into this equation, then B4 and B5 in certain communities that are proposed for approximately 10% growth should have a very tight boundary put around them, not a loose one, because they're getting what we said already, or the maximum of what we said already. So I'm with Councillor Bailey. I'm just coming at it from a slightly different attitude. And it's something that Mr. Freeman, I think, forgot, is that we need that criteria in there, which then changes which boundaries he's drawing in a tight or loose manner. And I just look to his views as to the best way of squaring this circle, because it is, exactly that. Otherwise, if Mr. Freeman can't answer that, then I'll happily second Councillor Bailey, because it's got to be done one way or another. So I look forward to Mr. Freeman. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. I think it goes back to the point that I think the committee made, where they said, well, the wishes that they wish to bring forward through the policy intent was that we don't have certain villages dying, really, because of lack of development and facilities coming forward. So it's how we maintain that vision while still not just having a plethora of development across the boundaries of our already established developments. And it's just squaring that circle. So completely concur with all the comments made. And Ed, can I come to you at that point, just so that we can sort that out and hopefully gain a second?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, these criteria are about potentially including some very small parcels of land within built-up area boundaries that could accommodate no more than sort of 4 homes on each. And it may be that some settlements, there wouldn't be any sites like this that could be included, or there may just be 1 or 2 in some settlements. We're not talking about drawing boundaries in such a way that they enable larger scale growth within these settlement boundaries, and certainly wouldn't be intending to include large scale sites that are going to lead to any kind of settlement coalescence. I think the criteria that Councillor Reinance was referring to would relate to very small parcels that perhaps sit between a proposed allocation and the existing boundary of that sort of scale, the small scale sites that could accommodate a small number of homes. So in answer to Councillor Howe's question, I wouldn't envisage that this is going to include anything that would lead to us exceeding 10% growth in any of the settlements. Because they're such small scale sites, that would just be a handful of homes potentially, and that's if all of those sites came forward. And of course, just including it within the boundary doesn't mean that someone's going to bring forward development on those sites in any way within that plan period. They're just opportunities where it could potentially come forward. So I'd like to think what we've done is following what members have instructed us to do from the previous meetings, in terms of drawing boundaries slightly more loosely to enable some small scale growth, but without exceeding the 10% growth guide that was indicated by members. In terms of Councillor Bailey's comments, I would say, we have obviously previously presented the urban capacity study work that was done. We do have a brownfield register. The reality is we just don't have very many brownfield sites within the district to bring forward. We will see if the new call for sites yields any further brownfield sites. We are doing further work in terms of the sites identified in the urban capacity study, and whether they could be brought forward as allocations or options through the plan. So that work is ongoing. As I say, I see this as really just about enabling small scale growth within the settlements to accommodate members' wish that there be the opportunities for some small scale growth within those settlements to meet the needs of those settlements to develop and not stagnate in the future. If we haven't done that, happy to look at the criteria and making some tweaks to accommodate members' wishes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ed. Sorry. Councillor Arnott, we come to you now, please.
Is that me, Chair?
It is indeed.
I'm terribly sorry. It's happened. Whatever. Premature raising of the hand. Sorry.
Councillor Ingham, we now come to you, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think for me, the elephant in the room is that we're still not addressing what I believe is our top priority, is to create housing that fits in with our climate emergency agenda. And every time that a member of our council says that we should be building a new town on a much bigger scale, we're told that's not possible. So we give up and we delay and we delay. Whereas I believe we should be making our top priority as members of the Strategic Planning Committee, how we're going to build a small new town, a very large set of villages are centered around Exeter Airport so that people stop commuting. These are very nice ideas that you can build more houses in your gardens in rural villages, but that's not going to save the climate agenda. You may be able to walk a smaller distance to your car, but you're still commuting. And I really do feel that it's essential we crack on with this, Chair, which we are not doing, and that's addressing the need for a new town in very close proximity to where people can work, which is Exeter Airport, Science Park, the Sky Park, maybe some of the business areas in close proximity to that. But this is just delaying things, and we're running out of time. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Skinner, we come to you now, please.
Sorry, I thought there was somebody else before me. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I really support the way this has been written out, the way you've done it, Ed, and actually, through you, Chair, actually, I think that this report has been in response to previous meetings of which we've had in this authority and the recommendations that were put forward by this committee talking about having a more ability to let the villages not wither on the vine and give them the ability to grow, but only in a small scale. So I very much pick up on what Councillor Howe was talking about, and I'm one very much of a reason to understand that there are many villages around, and I've been a representative of the villages that I've represented and changed from Talent to Orliscombe, so I've had experience of other villages as well, and come back for 22 years. And there's always been, all villages will come up with, oh, I don't know why you can't put a house in there or put a house in there or a house here or whatever it may be. And you sit there and you think, oh, common sense prevails that why can't we do that? And our policies have been always so stringent. At the same time, I can also understand from Councillor Bailey's perspective of West Hill in particular, and taking West Hill, and these are my thoughts and comments, that West Hill I very much see as a place. I was always against the building of in the gardens. They got a big house with a big garden, and then all of a sudden somebody's going to move, so they want to try their hand on getting planning permission in a house, and they overscale it. And I also support that, because I didn't want to see that overscaled. I felt that they were big houses for a reason, and I didn't want to see overdevelopment in such places as West Hill, if I mind to pick that out as an option. But what B4 and B5 does, and the reason why I'm not going to go with that, and I'm going to go with the recommendation, and I'll move if it's not been moved, Chair. I can't remember now whether it's been moved or not, but I'm actually going to go with the recommendations that this report has set out. And I'm quite happy to move that here and now, because I actually believe that what members say at one meeting, we seem to get in a through of, oh yes, they're all very supportive, the villages need to do a bit more and all the rest of it. Then we have a gap then for about 5 weeks. Then we come together again And then somebody takes a steer on seeing, and all of a sudden the mood changes from, oh, well, they forget what they said at the last meeting to bring it to this meeting. And I think that what we want is a bit of continuity from the officers. The reason why Ed and his team have written this up is because they've taken the advice from previous meetings of what we've asked them to do. They've now responded what we've asked them to do, and now some of those things are being challenged. Well, in my view, the way that it's being done on a small scale, and Ed has quite rightly pointed out how they're intending to deal with this is not overdevelopment. And the one thing you might want to remember that we've got in the rural areas, and I say this to certain members that sit here, land. We've got lots of land. If you go into Exeter, they can't develop in there because they haven't got any land. So what we need is this balance between land availability of doing the right things in the right place. And no, I do not want to see villages swamped with large numbers of housing coming forward in them. That's the last thing I want. But they need to be let to be grow organically. And I believe this document addresses that issue. I'm pleased with the fact that it's a little flexible around the lines being drawn. I like the flexibility that I also very much would like to see that as the neighbourhood plans come forward, that some of these villages have the opportunity to choose and maybe support developments that would take place in their villages that they would be very comfortable with. And that is not necessarily those people that sit in this room at this meeting who may not always agree with that view. So what I'm saying is that what this document does is it gives us opportunities for the villages, and it gives them options to be able to maybe maneuver on application by application basis, as you see in this report, how it's coming out. And it's on that basis of flexibility, but I also respect Councillor Bailey and the views that she's putting forward in trying to not have overdevelopment in places like the coalescence of green wedges and those things. But as Mr. Freeman's already suggested, that is going to come forward in another document. So I'm very much supportive of those things, and what Councillor Rylance, one of the two things Councillor Rylance was talking about, I very much support that. But I don't see that this document, the way it's written, actually overrides those views and those thoughts. I think it's very well written. It's very carefully written by Ed, giving us the ability to go on what is the things we've said, agreed on and voted on in previous meetings to get to this meeting, to get to this place today. And I very much support those things that have gone forward. I support this report, and Chair, I'm happy to move it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Skinner. Does that warrant a second off anyone?
I'll second it, Chair.
Councillor Arnott, Councillor Lawrence, either or. So Councillor Lawrence is seconding. We'll now come, Councillor Davey, you've yet to speak, so I'll bring you in now, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm just a bit concerned about B4, that it doesn't have any kind of size limitation on it. And I think Ed said that it was going to be only small areas of land, but I'm somewhat concerned that this could open up large areas of land. So what I would suggest is that what it says in B4 is areas of land subject to the conditions of B5. So we're only talking about areas of land that would be no larger than 0.15 of a hectare. I'm just a bit concerned otherwise that we're going to be talking about potentially quite large areas there. I also want to ask Ed how susceptible this process might be to lobbying by developers to have sites included, and what is built into this to resist that. I mean, if we're only talking about very small allocations, then that's absolutely fine. But I want to make sure that no large allocations are going to result from this process.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. Councillor Arnott, we'll come to you now, please.
Oh, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was doing that a minute ago, not to second, but to because I've done a sort of thing with my hand, haven't I, prior to this. So very quickly, pleased to hear the point that there'll be further discussion on green wedges, and so hopefully B4 and B5 won't threaten those, but I'm sure this will come up again. And the second thing is just to I hope, offer some comfort to Councillor Bailey and others. So if we do need to remember that we've got a new service lead for a housing task force, Jo Garfoot, and one of her principal activities is looking out brownfield land, also looking at land that is owned by us within the authority. And that is an absolute driving priority of this administration, is to see if we can build on those things. So just to reassure Jess about that. And I imagine, Chair, this is in your domain a bit, but that Jo will bring a report to Cabinet quite soon about early progress on that. The other thing is, though, nevertheless, notwithstanding that, that's only likely to inevitably provide a relatively small percentage of what the housing need is. But if it's brownfield and if we own it, then this administration would like to build on it where possible. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this predominantly works into the works of community land trusts and small SMEs working into organic small growth around the villages. I think that it's perfectly acceptable with what's been listed. Councillor Bailey, can we come to you now, please?
Hi, thank you very much. I just wanted to come back really on what Ed Freeman said, and that this is all very small scale sites. Well, when villages have got very, very long boundaries, it only takes, it's potentially opening up hundreds of sites, hundreds and hundreds. So, I think even as it stands, B4, B5 and B6, and I really don't understand B6 because it seems to say, well, it was unacceptable, but then the applicants can somehow overcome that and make it acceptable. So I think that even though this only relates in theory to small scale development, the capacity for it to change the character and to encourage sprawl is there. And I think that we've got established boundaries, they've worked well, and this is just potentially opening it up. And in terms of human resources, I think this is a really, really labour intensive piece of work, because presumably you're going to have to go through every single boundary of every single settlement, ask every single person if they want to put somewhere forward, and I don't really understand why that's the focus. Whereas actually, and I'm really glad to hear from the leader about the task force. But in addition to that, I really think that we should be looking at a strategic level. So when the guest report was done by LDA in 2018, they were looking at strategic sites within their town, within Exeter, for more than 100 houses. And Councillor Skinner is right that we do have land, but our land is a precious resource. Our countryside is a precious resource. And if an alien landed here and looked to see how much effort we've put into trying to utilise land that's already been built on, they would say, well, what have you actually done? And Ed Freeman talks about the urban capacity study, but that was about land that hasn't been built on within our urban areas. So there's a massive issue that we haven't tried hard enough yet to actually address that. And I know that it makes it all more difficult, and it's developers like Greenfields, but I really, really feel that we should be commissioning a study to actually look at the strategic urban sites that could be redeveloped, and we should be following what Exeter did in 2018. So that's what I would like us to do. And I think that the more time goes on, the more that we're just focusing on the outskirts where we could have a house, and I totally agree with Councillor Ingham. Here we are talking about, can we have a house in a paddock or a large garden? Meanwhile, we really want to see information about the new town. So I'm still against B4, B5 and B6. So I would like to see them excluded. I don't know whether we're at the stage where, I made a proposal, but I haven't had any support yet, but maybe Councillor Howe might support, I don't know. But please, can we deliver a strategy, commission a survey, a strategic survey on our urban, on our towns, to see what can be done about them. Because at the moment, I can't see, apart from the task force, which I think is on small areas, I can't see that anything's being done on a strategic level. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. We currently have a proposal on the table that's already been seconded. We'll take the vote on that before I take any further proposals. So, Councillor Howe, we'll come to you now, please.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm reading the wrong document or not, because I've listened to a number of speeches. Councillor Skinner being very eloquent in his usual way, and he's talking about villages that are going to wither and die. These settlement boundaries don't apply to those villages anyway. What we are talking about are the tier 1 to 4s, which are not in any shape or form under threat of going to wither and die, because guess what? They've got large allocations in most of them. And that is where I started my premise on, following Councillor Bailey in a slightly different tact, of there should be a 10% limit. If we're allocating 10% houses already to a tier 4 village, let's use a tier 4 village, there should be a very tightly drawn boundary, because we shouldn't be going over the 10%. And it's quite simple, that, and it really is. And in that respect, I kind of support Councillor Bailey. Councillor Arnott, very eloquent speech, and I do believe what you're doing, but it needs to go further. And that was the point I think Councillor Bailey was making. You are looking at car parks, bits and pieces of land, and we should be looking at the Magnolia Centre down Exmouth. We should be looking at large pieces of infrastructure that are going to take many years, won't be part of this local plan, but might well start saving land next local plan or the one after. And it will take many years, because you're looking at multiple landowners and large tranches of development. But we need to be more ambitious for the future. Doesn't change now, but the future does need to come along. I'm struggling with this. I really am, because of those provisos put in that Councillor Bailey's going on about, where we have communities that are going to be subjected to the 10% barrier anyway. We are going to draw a boundary that is looser around those to allow more than 10% development, even though they are only in 1s, 2s and 3s. Multitudes of 1s, 2s and 3s on already a 10% adds up. So I can't vote for this recommendation as it stands. I would happily accept a 4th or 5th C on the end of areas to be excluded, where the developments already encompass 10%, or whether strategic land allocations already encompass 10%, etc., to be excluded, and then keep it very tight, or possibly, but I don't know where to go, but I certainly can't support this document as it stands. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Howe. Councillor Pratt, will come to you now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a reminder that the vision and objectives of this local plan are to create a greener East Devon. And I think one of the problems has been that the planners are very keen on using greenfield sites. One thing I want to make sure of is that the green wedges, many of which are set out from the neighbourhood plans that have been made throughout the district, those green wedges are protected, and that no development will take place within the green wedges. I think that is important and must be one of the exceptions to any of these criteria if it goes through today. The situation on the criteria, I agree with Councillor Bailey. I'm certainly not happy with B6. I don't understand why that's in there. That should be taken out. So I think we'll leave it there for the moment, but I'm not really happy with this at all.
Thank you very much, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Arnott, will come to you. We'll go to Ed, and then we'll go to Mrs. Shaw to sum up.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, I hope just to offer some comfort and reassurance to Councillors Bailey and Howe. So just to say to Councillor Bailey again, the work of Jo Garford. So again, I mean, forgive me, I do have to say this. This council hasn't appointed this role before, and she started in mid-January and will report soon. And the main aim is to try and identify brownfield site we can build on. So that really is seriously what we're trying to do. And I think what we have to accept as district councillors is that you have a two-pronged strategy to this, don't you? There is the strategic level, which Jess quite rightly points out is us here, literally the strategic planning committee setting a sort of high-level policy. But there's also, which is really rather more how I like to try and do things as well, is just get on with it. Just get on with it. And that's what we're trying to do through Joe Garfoot's work at the moment. Find the sites. One of the absolute tragedies of today, and I do mean that, is that a site that has already been identified in Axminster is now screwed by this Axe Valley nutrient plant. It is absolutely tragic. That had real potential to deliver. And then going to Councillor Howe's point, so, and I understand how not all councillors can always, be aware of all of this, but the Queen's Drive committee at Exmouth now has effectively, or we have an officer specifically to look at how the change is made in Exmouth in the future, both on the seafront and in the town centre. So this administration has brought the town centre into that consideration, and in that will be sorry, Councillor Skinner, am I cracking a joke here? Do you want me to tell you a real one? Or, okay, you're obviously having trouble stifling a laugh.
Do you want me to speak, Councillor Arnott? Do you want me to speak?
Not save us, please. So the Exmouth Magnolia Centre will absolutely be part of the consideration about the future of Exmouth. And the first meeting in person in Exmouth happens tomorrow, led by Jerry, who is our new employee who is going to look after visioning the future of Exmouth. And that will revolve around councillors working out how a consultation strategy should be done over the summer about the future of Exmouth. So I just wanted to put that in, Chair, because Councillor Howe has raised the Magnolia Centre, and it is absolutely crucial, a crucial part of Exmouth, and I would just like to agree with that. Finally, if I'm really honest with you, Chair, I'm completely confused around B4, 5 and 6 now. I'm a bit worried that there is significant reservation coming from Councillor Howe and Councillor Bailey and Councillor Pratt. And I'm not really sure how we progress that. I'm just mentioning that here. I don't know if these things need further thought at a future meeting, perhaps. I don't know.
We have a proposal on the table. It's been seconded. We've got no further speakers at this time. We'll take that to a vote. If it falls, then we can come forward with other recommendations. But we'll take it to a vote. So over to you now, Mrs. Shaw, please.
I thought you mentioned about bringing Mr. Freeman back in for a comment.
Apologies. Yeah, I need to bring in Ed. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I think there's a couple of points to pick up on. I think Councillor Davies said about criteria B4 and whether or not this should only apply to small sites. I think in reality it would only be small sites anyway, but I have no problem if members wanted to make that explicit in the criteria and say it's only small areas of land that are largely contained between site allocations proposed in draft local plan and the main built-up area of the related settlement, just to make that clear. As I say, I mean, I think with B4, B5, B6, we have looked at this quite carefully, and we do think it will only yield 1 or 2 at the most small sites, of no more than 4 homes. In reality, in the settlements, I think we did do a worked example of this to see how this would apply, and that was the case in one of the largest villages that we tried. So I think the concerns that are being raised won't be reality once we've applied the criteria, but I appreciate that's difficult to understand when we're just looking at criteria. But as I said, I think this does follow through from previous discussions that members have had. So if this isn't acceptable, then we really do need some clarity about where members want to go in terms of the built-up area boundaries, so that we can move forward with that area of work. I think Councillor Bailey made I think Councillor Davey also made a point about developers lobbying. I mean, there is that risk. I mean, I think developers promoting land will have put that forward through the call for sites anyway. So I suspect they will be going more through that route than this. But clearly there is some risk of that happening. And yes, it is a labour-intensive process, to answer Councillor Bailey's question, but we have to go through this process in terms of reviewing and redefining the boundaries of all of the settlements. That is part of the work we need to do for the local plan, and it needs to be up to date and backed up by evidence for it to stand up to scrutiny at the examination of the plan. In terms of brownfield sites, as I said, I think there is perhaps more work than has been picked up on through this discussion going on in terms of brownfield sites and bringing those forward. I'm not sure there's merit in doing what Exeter City Council have done in terms of their strategic brownfield sites assessment, because I don't think we have any sites where you could deliver strategic scale development on brownfield sites within the settlements, and I think that's shown through the brownfield register work and the urban capacity study. But perhaps resources permitting, we need to bring some further information to members on the work that's been going on in terms of that and how that fits into the wider strategy. And finally, I'll just come back to Councillor Ingham and reassure him that there is lots of work going on in terms of the new community. The consultants, CBRE, who we've appointed to do lots of work on that, are working on that. We've had an inception meeting and work is underway, and there'll be further reports coming forward in due course to advise members of progress and engage members further in that work. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much for that, Ed. Mrs. Shaw, can I come to you now, please?
Yes, Chair. Members, you have a recommendation that the committee endorse the proposed methodology for defining settlement boundaries as set out in paragraph 2 of the report, and to delegate authority to the service lead, planning strategy and development management to use the methodology in preparation of the plan for consultation. Please press your green tick if you support that recommendation, press your red cross if you're against the recommendation, or raise your electronic hand if you to indicate you're abstaining from the vote.
Thank you. Just waiting for the votes to come in. Okay, so currently we have 7 votes in support, 3 votes against and 1 abstention, so that is carried.
So thank you very much. That's passed. So with that brings our meeting to an end. I'd like to thank everyone, including the members of the public, for their attendance. Can I remind members that the Democratic Service team will confirm when the live streaming is stopped. You can still be seen and heard until that time. Thanks all.
Thank you, Chair.